Whispers of the Ancients, Episode 7, Ghana Empire, Land of Gold approximately 300 to 1200 CE, long before the golden courts of Mali, before the silent tombs of Zimbabwe stone, there rose a realm in the heart of the soul, a kingdom forged in silence, salt and sun, where traders crossed 1,000 dunes, and kings weighed gold with the dust of time. Welcome to Ghana, not the modern nation that bears its name, but an empire of myth and memory, the first great power of West Africa. Segment 1. Foundations in the Soul. Sometime between the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, in the semi-arid lands where the Sahara kisses the savannah, a polity began to stir in what is now southeastern Mauritania and western Moi. It was known to its people as Ouagadougou, though outsiders would one day call it the Empire of Ghana. The story of Ghana begins not with a single founder or a flash of conquest, but with a patient accumulation of power. Clusters of Sonic-speaking communities, farmers, herders, and iron workers settled near the headwaters of the Senegal and Niger rivers. These water sources would become the lifeblood of trade, while the harsh desert to the north and woodlands to the south formed a natural corridor for exchange. The Sonic, adept at iron smelting by the early centuries of the Common Era, turned their metallurgical prowess into advantage. Their tools made farming more productive, their weapons made defense more reliable, but it was their location strategically poised between desert traders and forest resources that would transform them from a collection of villages into an empire. By the 5th century, Ghana's early kings began asserting control over regional trade routes, collecting tolls from passing caravans and establishing control over gold-producing regions to the south. These kings were not yet emperors in the grand style, but they were rising fast. Segment 2, the Golden Exchange. Gold, that was the secret. Not merely ornament or treasure, gold was the engine of Trans-Saharan trade, and Ghana controlled the tap. To the south, in the forests of what is now modern-day Ghana, lay rich gold fields, particularly around Bambouk and Pure. To the north stretched the Sahara Desert, home to Berber merchants and Arab traders who yearned for this precious metal. Between these two worlds stood Ghana. Caravans laden with salt from Tagaza and oil in the Sahara, an equally prized commodity traveled across brutal dunes to reach Ghana's markets. There, salt was exchanged for gold dust, ivory, cola nuts, and enslaved individuals. The salt was essential, preserving food and sustaining life in the humid south. In return, the north received gold that would mint coins in Al-Andalus, adorn caliphs in Cairo, and dazzle merchants in Baghdad. The Ghanaian kings did not allow the gold fields to be directly exploited by foreigners. Instead, all gold nuggets belonged to the king. Only gold dust could be traded by merchants. This royal monopoly strengthened the state and gave the kings a symbol of near-divine authority. At the height of its power between the 9th and 11th centuries, Ghana's capital, probably the city known as Kambi Sole, was a twin settlement. One half was inhabited by the Sonic people and the royal court, the other, just a few kilometers away, was home to Muslim merchants, scholars, and traders. It was a cosmopolitan arrangement, African animist kings and Islamic traders coexisting, each respecting the other's spheres of life. Arab chroniclers like al-Bakri, who never visited Ghana but compiled traveler accounts in the 11th century, described the king as a majestic figure. He sat in audience adorned in gold, flanked by drummers, dogs wearing golden collars, and guarded by nobles with swords of iron. He did not speak directly to supplicants. Messages were conveyed through interpreters, emphasizing his sacred distance. The court's rituals reinforced the mystique of kingship, blending political power with religious reverence. The king was both secular ruler and spiritual guardian, mediator between the earth and the spirits of the ancestors. Segment 3, the structure of empire. The Ghana Empire was not a centralized bureaucracy in the style of Rome or China. It was a federated structure, a core region ruled directly by the king, with surrounding vassal territories paying tribute in goods, soldiers, or allegiance. Local rulers, often related to the king through familial or political ties, were allowed autonomy so long as they paid homage. This decentralized approach was flexible and suited to the region's geography and diversity. The imperial capital acted as a hub, but the spokes of power stretched far into the soul. The Sonic elite were the backbone of this system. Through them, royal edicts were enforced. Gold controlled and trade taxed. They were the iron keepers, the administrators, and the spiritual intermediaries of their land. Islam began to make inroads into Ghana's elite class during the 9th and 10th centuries, primarily through contact with North African merchants. However, for most of its history, Ghana's rulers remained animist, revering ancestral spirits and natural forces. This religious duality did not create immediate conflict. Muslim traders had their own settlements and judges. Animist kings continued their traditional rites. But over time, the growing prestige of Islamic scholarship and international connections began to influence power dynamics, especially as rival kingdoms with Muslim rulers emerged in the region. Segment for faith, fire, and the Almoravid shadow. The quiet coexistence of animist kings and Muslim merchants in Ghana eventually met a challenge not from within, but from across the desert. In the late 11th century, a puritanical Islamic reform movement emerged in the Western Sahara. Known as the Almoravids, they were Berber tribesmen united under a strict interpretation of Islam. What began as a religious awakening soon grew into a militarized crusade. The Almoravids swept through the Maghreb and into Al-Andalus, establishing a powerful dynasty in the Islamic world. Their gaze eventually turned southward toward Ghana. Their motivations were not solely religious. While the Almoravids certainly sought to spread Islam, they also desired control of the gold trade and the lucrative Trans-Saharan routes Ghana monopolized, whether through holy war, economic strategy, or political infiltration. Their influence reached deep into Ghana by the 1070s. Some sources suggest that Kambi Solo was attacked around 1076 CE, and that the Almoravids briefly seized it. Others claim they merely disrupted trade and influenced religious conversion. The evidence remains contested, our knowledge filtered through Arab chronicles and oral traditions, but it is clear that Ghana's hegemony was shaken. Even if the city wasn't sacked, its role as the uncontested center of trade and faith was diminished. The stability that had allowed Ghana to flourish, the peaceful bridge between desert and forest, was fracturing. Local Muslim factions began to challenge traditional rule. Vassal states grew. Restive, a combination of internal strain and external pressure, started to chip away at Ghana's foundations. Segment 5. The river breaks, decline and disintegration. After the Almoravid intrusion, Ghana entered a long twilight. The 12th century was marked not by dramatic collapse, but by a slow erosion of authority. Trade routes shifted. The forest goldfields began to fall into the hands of rising southern polities. One by one, tributary regions broke away or stopped sending allegiance. The royal court, still animist in its core, struggled to maintain unity in an increasingly Islamic geopolitical landscape. Attempts to adopt Islam at the royal level were likely made, but failed to yield the same cohesion achieved in later empires like Mali. The very success of Ghana's trade had drawn new contenders into the fray, particularly the Man-speaking peoples to the south and east, who would eventually found the Empire of Mali. Around 1200 CE, Ghana's former territories were absorbed into this rising power. A new imperial cycle had begun, but Ghana did not vanish overnight. The Sonic people remained. Their oral traditions preserved memories of Ouagadougou's splendor, even as the political center shifted elsewhere. In the old capital of Kambi Solo, archaeologists have found evidence of sophisticated urban limestone foundations and mosque and street layouts, but it is silent now. A city remembered more in story than in stone. Segment 6. Gold, salt and the birth of West African memory. What made Ghana endure in history was not just its gold, but its legacy. It established a template and model for West African empires that followed. Mali and Songhai would mirror its structure: a powerful king, a trade-based economy, a syncretic religious culture, and control of gold. Ghana proved that the soul could support empire, that wealth could be mined not from fields alone, but from the crossroads of exchange, that Africa's history was not one of timeless tribes, but of cities, diplomacy, and grandeur. The kings of Ghana title Ghana, meaning war chief, laid the linguistic and political foundation for imperial power. The term eventually came to represent the whole realm, not just its ruler. Modern Ghana, thousands of kilometers to the south, adopted the name at independence in 1957, symbolically linking itself to this ancient source of African pride and sovereignty. The echo of Ouagadougou continues in griot songs, in local legend, and in the ambitions of modern African states, seeking to reclaim agency in global memory. Segment 7, Oral Tradition, the Dossi epic, long after its fall. The story of Ghana lived on in the oral epic of the Sonic people, especially in the famed Dossi. The Dossi tells of heroic kings, divine interventions, and a gradual corruption of the Ouagadougou state. It is not a chronicle, but a cultural parable, its facts embroidered with myth, yet echoing historical truth. Central to the Dossi is the theme of betrayal. In one version, a woman named Bida, a serpent deity, demands annual sacrifices in exchange for continued prosperity. The final king breaks this pact, and the empire collapses into drought and ruin. This is not just a story about religion or monsters, it's an allegory, an explanation for the inexplicable decline of a mighty power, a warning about breaking bonds, spiritual, political, or environmental. It illustrates how African societies preserved historical consciousness without writing, through performative memory, collective song, and intergenerational storytelling. In this way, Ghana remains vivid not only in foreign chronicles, but in the living breath of the descendants who still remember Ouagadougou's name. Segment 8, Legacy in the Sand. Though its ruins are few and its written records foreign, Ghana was never forgotten. It opened the gates to Trans-Saharan commerce. It balanced diplomacy with cultural autonomy. It proved that African states could rise not in isolation, but in dialogue with the world from the Mediterranean to the Niger River. Today, historians continue to reconstruct Ghana's story from a mosaic of archaeology, Arab travelogues, and oral heritage. It is a tale still unfolding one fragment at a time. Before Mali's mansions of gold, before Songhai's books of wisdom, there was Ouagadougou, the empire of iron and spirit, of sand and silence, of gold that shone in the sun and salt that preserved its memory. Its kings are long gone, its drums are still, but in the whisper of desert winds, in the thrum of griot chords, Ghana speaks. Segment 9, The Silent Wealth, Gold, Trade, and the Rise of Kambi Sola. In the golden heart of West Africa, a curious silence blanketed the bustling markets of Kambi Sola. It was not the hush of emptiness, but the practiced quiet of merchants bound by tradition. Here, gold dust was weighed with iron scales. Here, voices were muted, buyers and sellers communicated without words, using gestures alone in sacred marketplaces. This was the famed silent barter system, the economic lifeblood of the Ghana Empire. Gold was the pulse of the land, drawn from deep within the earth and riverbanks of the southern forests. The Wangara people, secretive and elusive, guarded the source of this treasure fiercely. They brought it northward to the empire's borders, where it passed into the hands of Ghana's brokers. In return, salt just as valuable flowed southward from Tagaza in the Sahara. This exchange was not mere trade, it was ritual, deeply embedded in the rhythms of West African life. Kambi Sola, the empire's twin capital, was the hub of this wealth. One half of the city belonged to the king, with his grand stone-built palace, drummers announcing his edicts, and a retinue of courtiers, interpreters, and tribute-bearers from vassal states. The other half pulsed with life from the Islamic merchant community, mostly Berber and Arab traders who would cross the desert with their camels laden with silks, swords, and scrolls. The city became the largest in sub-Saharan Africa of its time, its walls echoing with a polyglot of tongues, Sonic, Berber, Arabic, and a jingle of coins struck from foreign mints. While the Sonic rulers held to their traditional beliefs, they welcomed these outsiders with tolerance. Their spiritual center remained rooted in the animist practices of their ancestors. But the trade with the Islamic world brought new ideas, books, and building techniques into Ghana's sphere. Beyond Kambi Sola, the wealth of the Ghana Empire radiated across the Sol and beyond. Gold from Ghana found its way into the treasuries of Cairo, Al-Andalus, and even far off Baghdad. The black sands of the Sahara, once an obstacle, became an artery of prosperity thanks to the camel caravans, those ships of the desert that carried riches, stories, and souls. But wealth, as history teaches us, is both a blessing and a burden. Segment 10. Beneath the sun-kissed walls, daily life in the Ghana Empire. Behind the splendor of palaces and the clinking of gold, the Ghana Empire thrived in its people, farmers, smiths, traders, griots, and warriors, each weaving their role into the empire's fabric. Most Sonic people lived in compounds built of mud brick, their walls plastered smooth and painted with earth-toned designs. The compounds circled around a central courtyard where elders told stories and children played under baobab trees. Women pounded millet or sorghum, while men hunted or maintained the fields. Agriculture, sustained by the seasonal rhythm of the Niger floodplain, fed the cities, supporting a burgeoning population. Iron, too, was essential. Ghana's blacksmiths were highly revered not merely for their tools, but for the mystical power believed to be embedded in their craft. With fire and bellows, they forged weapons for warriors and tools for farmers. In many villages, the blacksmith was not only a craftsman, but a spiritual intermediary between the earthly and ancestral realms. Oral tradition flourished. The griots' living libraries preserved the memory of lineages, battles, trade treaties, and riddles. In elaborate performances, they sang of Wagadu's early kings, of alliances struck under moonlight, and of the wisdom of past queens. Their voices resonated in both kingly courts and village squares, ensuring that the people of Ghana would never forget who they were. Religion among the Sonic was deeply tied to the land. Sacred groves were tended with reverence and ancestral spirits were honored with offerings. Shrines dotted the countryside where priests performed rites to ensure rainfall, fertility, and protection from misfortune. Even as Islam slowly spread through trade routes and diplomacy, the two spiritual traditions, animist and Islamic, coexisted in relative harmony. In some cities, mosques rose beside sacred trees. In others, Muslim scholars debated law while traditional diviners cast cowrie shells. Ghana's genius was not in suppression, but in synthesis, a trait that allowed it to flourish across centuries. But no empire exists in stasis. As trade patterns shifted and foreign ambitions loomed, Ghana would face a series of challenges that would test the resilience of its gold-lined foundations. Segment 11. Storm from the Sands, the Almoravid invasion. By the 11th century, change rippled across the Sahara, not in trade caravans, but in the form of a religious and military fervor. To the north, in the heartlands of the Maghreb, a movement surged among the Berber tribes. The Almoravids, warriors bound by a strict interpretation of Islam, sought to reform what they saw as lax religious practices and to spread the purity of their faith through conquest. What began as a revivalist wave in the deserts of Mauritania crested toward the riches of Ghana. Reports of the Sonic king's refusal to convert, of the mingling of Muslim traders with pagan rulers, of vast stores of gold and fertile lands, all of this proved too tempting. The Almoravids, under the leadership of Abu Bakr ibn Umar and later Yusuf ibn Tashfin, saw Ghana not only as a trading partner, but as a domain ripe for religious and political domination. Sometime around 1076 CE, the storm broke. Almoravid forces crossed the Sahara, seizing control of key trade routes and targeting Kambi Sola. Their campaign was not solely about conquest, it was about reshaping the soul of West Africa. In the image of the Maghreb, when Kambi Sola fell, its palaces looted and its markets disrupted. It marked a turning point in Ghana's history, yet the invasion was not total. The Almoravids could conquer cities, but they could not easily impose their beliefs on the vast Sonic countryside. Though some elites converted, many retreated deeper into the forests, preserving their traditions. The power of Ghana fractured, but its memory and culture endured. The Almoravid influence waned as quickly as it had risen. Their grip was fleeting, a burn of wind and fire across the soul. And while they did not destroy Ghana outright, they exposed the empire's vulnerabilities: economic dependence on trade routes, political centralization in Kambi Sola, and the increasing religious tensions between animist traditions and Islamic reformers. In the wake of the invasion, Ghana was changed forever. The golden silence of its marketplaces was broken, its traders scattered, and in the vacuum, new powers began to stir. Segment 12, the shifting sands, decline and succession. Empires are not felled in a single night. The decline of Ghana was not an explosion, but a slow erosion, grains of power slipping through fingers over generations, as trade routes diverted eastward toward the Niger River bend. Emerging city-states like Gao and Timbuktu began to challenge Ghana's economic supremacy. Internal pressures mounted. Vassal kings once bound by tribute saw an opportunity for independence. The once centralized authority of Ouagadougou fragmented into smaller kingdoms and confederations. Drought, too, may have played a role. The fragile Sahelian environment, reliant on seasonal rains and sustainable agriculture, began to crack under overuse and climatic shifts. Crop failures and food shortages would have strained even the wealthiest court. By the mid-12th century, the Ghana Empire had receded from its zenith. Kambi Sola, once the jewel of the soul, faded into obscurity. Muslim geographers who once marveled at its splendor began to write of its ruins. But from the ashes, new flames would rise. The Mandinka people of the south, once tributaries of Ghana, watched and learned. Their griots remembered Ghana's lessons of wealth and warfare, of tolerance and trade. In time, under the leadership of Sundiata Keita, they would forge a new destiny in the form of the Mali Empire, greater, broader, and even richer in gold than Ghana had ever been. Thus, the spirit of Ghana lived on not in name, but in legacy. Segment 13, Legacy in Gold and Story. Though Ghana faded, its legacy shimmered in the memories of the griots and the glint of every coin minted in far-off lands with African gold. It was the Ghana Empire that first turned the soul into a crossroads of commerce, faith, and diplomacy. It was Ghana that showed the world that Africa was not a continent of isolated tribes, but a land of empires, complex, literate, industrious. The silent trade, the twin city of Kambi Sola, the balance of animist tradition and Islamic adaptation, these became templates for those who followed. Mali, Songhai, Hausa city-states, all owed something to Ghana's bold experiment in wealth and governance. In the songs of the griots, Ghana was never dead. Ouagadougou was merely sleeping hidden in a lake, guarded by a black snake, waiting for the day it would rise again. Even today, the name Ghana evokes a memory older than modern borders, when Kwame Nkrumah led the Gold Coast to independence in 1957. He chose Ghana as the name of the new republic not because of geographical continuity, but because of spiritual inheritance, a way to remind the world Africa was great long before colonization. Africa will be great again. Ghana was not just a land of gold, it was a land of memory, and memory, unlike empires, does not fall.